Hello, Garland Nixon here. We're hanging out with Patrick Henningsen over at a 21st Century Wire, a great media outlet. Covered a lot of great stuff, and I check them out all the time. Let's talk. All right, everybody, let's hear it for Patrick Henningsen. And before we go, before we get going, we got to find out. Let's check with Keir Starmer. Things aren't going so well for him. Let's get a word from Keir Starmer. How's things going over at number 10 Downing Street? Just as I suspected. All right, Patrick Henningsen. Patrick Henningsen. Patrick Henningsen. Let's get started here. You know, a while back, so those who've been following my channel, right, for a long time know, you know, I way back when made some predictions, right? And there were two. One of them was, I said, oh, at some point, because people were like, how's it going to end? And I say, the neocons, they're going to do what they always do, right? They hang around, they steal everything that ain't nailed down, then they steal the nails. Once they've stolen everything, I said, they're going to do the, what did the Israelis call it? The Samson option. I said, they're going to do the Samsonite option. They pack their bags and they get the hell out of it. And the one thing I brought up was the guy. It's interesting. I brought up the guy who is the puppet in charge of Afghanistan. And if you remember, when he left, the day he left, he had $160 million in cash. And when he was driving up the tarmac to get on the plane, there was satchels of money falling out of the vehicles. And it's like, and you just pictured this is how U.S. puppets end, right? And I was like, that's what's going to happen. Either they're going to put a bullet in Zelensky, or he'll be trying to escape with every dime he has. The neocons will be like, oh, well, this grift is over. Let's get the hell out of here. And now it looks to me like, driven by the what's happening on the battlefield, I feel like I was spot on. And I can go back to my videos and point to that stuff. Anyway, what are your thoughts on what the hell's going on? This thing's a disaster. Kiev is coming unglued, man. Go ahead.
I think the bloodletting here is going to be extended. It's not going to end with a thud like Afghanistan did, because that was mainly a U.S. driven operation. So it was kind of, that was the single point, the main single point. NATO was just really window dressing for a U.S. led and British too led operation. But this is different because all of the reputations of all of the leading European countries and the EU itself are tied to the Ukraine narrative. That's why this is going to, the suffering, the pain, the bloodletting is going to continue until morale improves. and then it's just going to carry on. It's going to go from bad to worse. They've all sunk so much of their political capital and literal capital into this that I just can't see them backing out. You have to remember, they've deindustrialized Germany and parts of Europe to accommodate the anti-Russian position and to support Ukraine. So that's a big price to pay. And the payoff for this, of course, is a bigger war. That's the payoff. And in Germany and these other countries and the bankers that are more or less driving, personally, I think this is being driven at a very, very high corporate and finance level, this whole project.
Yes.
But all of these wars in Europe have always been the same. World War I, World War II, and the United States has in the past pumped up the adversarial parties and then come in to mop it up afterwards, and then game the markets in order to, after the Second World War anyway, prop up the US dollar as a world reserve currency, and also to drain Europe of any real wealth, get them dependent on US products. I mean, look at the energy market. The United States wants exclusivity practically when it comes to gas and LNG. This doesn't add up. Doesn't make any sense at all. Russia never weaponized the gas. Europe and the U.S. weaponized the gas, and Nord Stream is the perfect example of that. So, and as I said on your program, maybe it was your program or another program, that a lot of people look at the Nord Stream sabotage as a reaction to the Ukraine war, but it's actually the other way around. The construction of the Nord Stream pipelines was the precursor for the Ukraine war. So it was the Ukraine war was a reaction to the construction of the Nord Stream project between Russia and Germany and the other European partners that were involved in that project. So, and that was when alarm bells went off, and that was when things had to be escalated and move very quickly. And so, and of course, it ended with a big bang in September 2022, with the pipelines were blown up. 3 pipelines were blown up. This is so significant. And by the way, the current story, the narrative, is very much tied to Nord Stream, very much so, because the entire credibility of NATO as a defensive alliance, the whole concept of NATO, is completely undercut by if there is an exposure as to what really happened to the Nord Stream pipelines. This Ukrainian super soldier diver 50-foot sailboat story is a joke. Anybody with a brain knows that. But I'm worried about Germany, of course, that people actually believe this is a thing. But I don't. I think it, so. So the whole the credibility of NATO rests on, and then European members rest on this Nord Stream narrative, because they let it happen. These pipes were wired and prepped during a NATO drill, Baltops 22, in June and July of summer of 2022, and it was detonated in another NATO drill. People don't know that, in September of 2022. So, and this is basically going to destroy the whole raison d'etre of the North Atlantic Treaty Alliance. So they have to keep this facade going, and it's tied directly to the political outcome in Kiev, because who is sitting in London getting elocution lessons and English lessons? None other than the former head of the Ukrainian Armed Forces himself, Valery Zaluzhny. And he's got his memoirs out. Very shiny, classy book. He's wearing $1,000 suit, and they've given him the makeover, the celebrity makeover, from brawling Nazi paramilitary leader to erudite head of state, bridesmaid in waiting, and the British are keeping him, and he has diplomatic immunity because of his ambassadorial position. So he can't be extradited for deposition in Germany for this fake Nord Stream investigation, you see. So that gives him the motivation to play ball on this. The British have him absolutely cornered. You see how this works, because he is the heir apparent when Zelensky gets the boot. Zaluzhny is the guy that the British would like to install, and they have full control over him. So they've had operational control over Zelensky, providing his close protection units, doing all of his public relations out of London, all of that micromanaged, everything out of the UK. And they want to keep control of that head of the government in Kiev when the transition happens. So I think it's a plan. Whether it works or not is another question. But I think that is basically a plan. So the U.S. have control over certain things, but the British also have control over really important things. And I would argue a lot more leverage in relation to their size than the U.S. have in this case. So even though Trump and he's saying, oh, we're on the phone with Putin. I had a great call. This is Trump. I had a great call. It's a great phone calls. Trump's term has been a string of great phone calls so far, but nothing actually happens in substance. So this is the latest. Oh, we're going to work out a deal with the Russians. This is like episode 6 in this series of let's make a deal. It's not going to happen, because every time they get close to doing something, there's a staged provocation by Ukraine, and the Europeans basically ramp up some false flag, fake drone incident, or whatever it is, or attack on Russian territory, whatever it is. And anything to push back any progress for diplomacy. I personally don't think Trump is serious, and Witkoff and these guys. The only thing, and I said this, I'm going to say it again because very controversial statement by myself, but the only thing that's going to nail down any kind of peace agreement or with Witkoff and Trump is if the Russians agree to give Steve and Jared the coastline of Odessa for high-rise resorts on the Black Sea. Like that's the only thing that you can get these people's the short attention span of the Trump administration, but that would get their attention. They'd be locked in to a diplomacy at that point. That's the ridiculous situation that we're in right now, Garland. It is fraught with failures and obstacles that are put in the way by the U.S. and by the European partners.
I think one thing the Russians understand, and that is that the only way to win a war is to win a war, right? I think the Russian position is, and I agree with wholeheartedly, but their position is, you guys want to do a lot of, tomfoolery. We're going to discuss, all of these deals that ain't going to happen and frozen lines and all this old bull crap. We're going to pound the enemy to shreds. We're going to pound them into the ground. In fact, you may wish to say at some point, we'll rebuild this army and we'll rearm and they can come back after Russia again. And I think Russia's position is we're going to pound them into shreds and there ain't going to be nothing left for you to rebuild. You're going to have to start with a brand new mold, because when we get finished with this, what little is left is going to have no motivation to fight. Anybody that survives this, when you say to them, hey, why don't we rearm you again and you can have another go at the Russians, and they start thinking about those 3,000-pound fab bombs, blasting them to shreds, and and when they think about it, they're going to say, no, we do not want another piece of that. I think the Russians realize ultimately the only way to win a war is on the ground, and that they understand that, ultimately the empire wants to be an empire. And it's like any deal it can make is just something temporary so we can come back later and try to win this thing, or, put things on hold. And the Russians understand, pound them, pound them, pound them. We'll talk, we'll negotiate. And while we're doing that, we're going to be pounding the hell out of the Ukrainians. And we get finished with them, they're going to be crying uncle. And you're going to, no matter what you want, you ain't going to have any fight out of the Ukrainians. The Ukrainian people are going to be cold. They're going to say, we don't want to go through no more winters without electricity, and we're going to create a dynamic where your proxy does not want to, whatever's left of this proxy is not going to have any motivation or desire to be a proxy for a second time around. And I think that's what the Russians realize. Ultimately, we got to beat them up, and then you can't work. We won't have anything to work with. Anyway, go ahead.
So in that sense, Russia's priced in all this, diplomatic theater by the Trump administration. They priced it into the equation. And I think the people need to take the Russian perspective on this. Russia has, like China, incredible continuity at the statecraft level and continuity of leadership and their etc. The U.S. doesn't. Okay, so they're looking, oh, here he is. This is the new one. Oh, he's back again. Oh, we had Biden for 4 years. It was a disaster. Nothing, it just went from bad to worse. It's kind of gone from bad to worse again with Trump. He's made a few noises. We've had some good photo ops. Okay, we'll play along with that. And we'll wait for, the next one. Who's that going to be? Gavin Newsom, President Newsom, or President Massey, or whatever. It doesn't matter. They're looking at from that point of view, and you're right, Garland. So the for Russia, the longer this goes, it's advantageous for them to have a low intensity grind or high intensity, whichever the case may be, but that they can change facts on the ground. And this doesn't work at all for Europe, because all of the European mechanisms for magicking money up to pay for this are all based on the premise that they're all underwritten, like the latest safe instrument that Ursula von der Leyen is trumpeting and saying, oh, Poland's going to do really well with the safe instrument, joint procurement. The money's going to come from Brussels, war bonds, EU war bonds. And then they're going to take the money they raise and loan it to Poland and Germany and France. And then that will also pay for joint procurement. So Ukraine gets a slice out of that. And it's all underwritten by the hope that Russia will lose and pay reparations. This whole scheme is underwritten by future Russian defeat and reparations. I kid you not. That is, so they've sold it to themselves. It's totally plausible in their eyes, even though we are laughing at that. It's ridiculous. And Scott Ritter would, of course, laugh like very loud and long at that one. But and so that's one scenario. The other scenario is equally preposterous, and that's they're going to steal Russian assets in order to pay for the war for the next year or two, and also for, quote, reconstruction of Ukraine. So there's two problems with that. One is it's going to set an awful precedent for the SWIFT system and Euroclear. So Belgium is dead set against it. They want all sorts of assurances in terms of risk and legal protection. But I don't think, they're really killing the Western post-World War II globalization system through this. Okay, but so that's one of the problems with stealing Russian assets here. The other problem with this heist that the Europeans are planning is that by the time the money is divvied up, and between all of these European countries, it's not a lot of money in that perspective. So between Germany, France, Brussels, Finland, Sweden, Denmark, all of them, the Central European countries don't want to have anything to do with this. And Romania, and they'll dump a bunch in Romania as well. They're going to still have to come back to the begging bowl after a year. So even if they manage to steal this money from Russia, and it's going to keep it going for a period of time. And Ukrainians, and Zelensky's looking at this as his pot of gold. Like, this would save me for a couple of years if we can get our hands on that. And so they're all telling each other that they can do all these different things, but at the same time, it's not going to translate to any kind of a military victory. It's just going to extend this debacle for a while. And I think that's the plan. And I think they're probably going to they're going to manage to do it. But the theft of the Russian assets, that's a huge problem, because that sets a terrible precedent, because the U.S. is currently sanctioning a lot of countries, including threatening their allies with secondary sanctions. So do they really want to go down this route? They'll probably stop short of the asset theft, and they'll say, we're going to use the assets in an interest-bearing escrow fund, and we're going to use the interest to support Ukraine. But the other problem, Garland, is most of the reconstruction is in Russian control. So they're not going to ask the international community for a penny for that. They're going to do it themselves. And so the majority of the reconstruction's on the Russian side. That's where in Russian controlled areas. So that's why BlackRock pulled out, you see, because it was pointless. They did that big conference, you remember, in Kiev or Lvov or whatever. And they said, oh yeah, this is the reconstruction of Ukraine conference. That was literally the last gasp right there. And they eventually pulled out because they realized there's nothing there. All the high performing assets and as Trump calls them, raw earth, not rare earth. Trump rebranded it to raw earth because he's clever like that. Donald, he can come up with terms really quick. And all of that, the high performing and exploitable assets are in the East, not in the West. The West has probably resources and assets, but it's going to take years to develop those. And the plan was to put U.S. companies in there and use them as human shields. That was the plan. That was Trump's another brainwave from Donald. I mean, they were smart. You got to give him credit. Him and Witkoff and Jared, they're very innovative with their plans. They sound great. I mean, it's great, but none of it ever can be realized. It never comes to fruition. So we're back to square one. Uh, my fear, Garland, is that the desperation on the European side is such that all these political careers, in fact, whole governments have sunk everything into this. They can't lose face. That to me is scary. And let's be honest, Garland, has there ever been a time in history where petty European tribal rivalries have led to absolute catastrophes? The answer is yes. Too
Every
many
time.
times.
Yeah,
Too
every
many
time.
times.
Every
Too
single
many
time.
times. I don't. That scares me, and the fact that Germany wants to have a shared nuclear deterrent. They're going to split France and Germany with nukes. I don't think so. Look, I don't trust the U.S. government as far as I could throw them, but I trust European countries with nuclear proliferation even less.
Yeah. Every time there's a world war, France, Germany, and England. That's the three countries that they just start the major wars. That's just who they are. That's what they do. They're lunatics. And if they can't fight together, and I'm convinced of this. Poland, they're going to end up with tanks on the German border. That if these countries can't fight together, which they can't, they'll fight each other.
Yes,
They'll kick the hell out of each other. They'll get pissed, and
absolutely.
then Germany will, Poland, and then France will have to jump in, and England. Well, there's only one good thing this time, actually, and that is that, and this is the other factor here I want to throw at you: corruption. The level of corruption in the EU. Kiev is an expression of the EU. People are like, "Oh my God, the corruption is unthinkable." It is an expression of its masters. It is like if you look at Kiev, you see Brussels, you see Cuttergate, you see Pfizer money going into von der Leyen's. You know what I mean? You just see that's the EU, that's Brussels, and Kiev is exactly it. So the thing about it is they are so corrupt. They have like bankrupted their countries with theft. They have wiped out their militaries. I saw this thing where they went after the Palestine Action people or whatever because they had like spray painted some planes, some fighter planes or something. And then come to find out, the fighter planes were owned by like this venture capital firm that was renting them back to the British government.
Yeah.
So it's like, you know what that is? That's payoff. That's graft. They end up paying 5 times what it costs for a fighter plane because it's not a fighter plane. That is a financial instrument. It's not a fighter plane. It's a financial instrument that they can find ways to, get graft and corruption. So the other side of it is, luckily, they do not have any way to fight. They got no militaries left. None of them. No money. They sent all the stuff to Ukraine where it's been blown to hell. They've just like stolen every dime. So even if let's just say, for the sake of argument, they get one of their plans together to get $500 billion or something for war to get ready, they'll steal every stinking dime of it. If they got $1 trillion and they gave $1 trillion to the UK, $1 trillion to France, and $1 trillion to Germany, and they said rebuild your military, they'd steal every dime of it. They build like 3 or 4 tanks and a couple airplanes, and you wouldn't know where the rest of it went. That's the other side of it. And so I'm just looking at Kiev. The thing about it is, though, I know they want to drag this thing out a couple years. It just seems like the graft and corruption, like it's coming apart at the seams. You got people now like saying, all right, I'm going to go to this other country and from Kiev, I'm going to go to this other country and work on some, a peace deal. I'm going to go to the other country. They call, I'm not coming back. Bye. Click. And I'm like, this thing's coming. If this thing falls apart like it appears to be falling apart, and they're like just trying to put Humpty Dumpty back together again, to hold it up together just enough to pretend like they got a government in Kiev so they can keep stealing money. That's all. There's not a war as far as them. So they can keep stealing money and they can't lose face. Notwithstanding, if they could keep it going along on the battlefield, the deterioration of this fake political scheme in Kiev seems like if that falls apart, doesn't the game fall apart? Doesn't the fish rot from the head down?
I think it's always been the graft and the massive corruption's always been there. What's different this time is, and it's very telling that this scandal is being highlighted by NABU. And so the two anti-corruption agencies, and this was all part of bringing Ukraine into the EU. They had to show, because they were just riding high on the global corruption index, too high, like number one and number two. And this was in 2012, 2013. And so the Americans created a NABU. And so this was more or less micromanaged out of Victoria Nuland and the U.S. Embassy in Kiev, late 2013 into Maidan, into 2014. And the U.S., they had Ukrainians running it, but these were all people, and they had to report to their American counterparts. And I think it was a corruption surveillance agency, because there was U.S. corruption that, of course, they would want to keep out of the general prosecutor's office, because we saw what happened with Viktor Shokin and the Burisma scandal and Zhoshevsky and that whole Hunter Biden business. So that, I think that was the motivation by the U.S. to fund that and to help support it. And then SAPO came later in 2015, and that was tied to the GPO, to the Ukrainian prosecutors. So NABU would create pre-trial investigations into corruption, and SAPO was tied to the prosecutor's office, and it broke. They split it. It's a fully independent agency now, and they probably split it because they couldn't have something like that tied to the prosecutor's office. So they're sort of doing anti-corruption work. But what do you have to understand, Garland, is there have been Ukrainian parliamentarians that have done this work, and they've all either been thrown in jail by Zelensky or kicked out of the country with death threats and everything else. I'm talking about Konstantin Kulak, Andrei Derkash, and Alexander Dubinsky, who's in jail right now, who could challenge Zelensky for the presidency, theoretically, if he was free and could talk to the media and stuff. So these were like anti-corruption Ukrainian patriots. There's so many of them, and they've all been chased and run down or thrown in jail, or some have probably been killed. And that goes for journalists as well. So that's the environment there. It's just totally bad. I think the fact that this came out of NABU is bad news for Zelensky. It shows you that the U.S. have taken the protections off, and his inner circle, and Rustem Umerov is the defense secretary. That's who I think you were referring to, had left the country. I think he's going to have to come back, if he's not back already. But the fact that all of these people, and Yermak, Zelensky's brain, he could end up resigning or leaving or something. When Yermak goes, that's it. Zelensky's finished, because that's his brain. That's Zelensky's. That's the guy that's really running the government. Is Yermak, his chief of staff. So Zelensky doesn't have any protections. He'll just be going to like social media, doing his stand-ups to the phone, like constantly trying to. I mean, it'll be entertaining, to say the least, to see what he comes out with before the fall, right? Before the downfall. So it's pretty bad. The kickbacks on the Energoatom, that whole scandal, the defense of the nuclear power plants. There's all sorts of these. They're just coming up left and right. But this has been going on the whole time, Garland. It's just now it's coming up. So that means it seems like the clock is ticking on the little comedian, the servant of the people. The clock is ticking. So what's his exfiltration strategy? Is his whole protection, Garland, is that he's the guy that can go to the West and bring home the money and the treasures and the prizes and the weapons. And that's the hard right, the Nazi Praetorian Guard that surrounds him in Kiev and Lviv. That's the thing. That's the only value that he brings to the table for them. The minute he can't do that, that's what that whole Macron thing was. That was just Zelensky with an extension of life, to do a signing ceremony of planes that haven't been built yet, paid for with money that nobody knows where it's going to come from. It's just theater. It was an MOU. It wasn't any kind of a deal. But Zelensky needs to do these things. Otherwise, he's finished. So I don't know. I really don't know how this is going to end with him. I do know that Zelensky is definitely the British favorite to replace him, and he would have the respect and control of what's left of the armed forces. And
But
probably
the
if the
Russians
Brit
will never accept that. The Russians will never accept a
him,
Banderite in charge. I mean, I saw a
mm.
picture of that guy with you see the one with the bracelet that's got a swastika on it, the infamous picture of this guy.
Oh no,
The
they'll
Russians,
say he's been reformed.
yeah,
And
but the
that
Russians
they
ain't going to accept it. Will
they'll do
never
a
accept a
Jelani.
Banderite.
They'll do a Jelani. You say, and
Yeah.
Trump will say, "Oh, Valery Zelensky's had a rough past. All the
Yep.
Nazi swastikas don't. He's had a rough past. Quite frankly, he couldn't have done the job without that rough past." You know?
And I think the issue they're going to have at some point. See, the Russians demands. Here's the thing, and Obama's many people have said this. It's existential to Russians. I just came from Russia. Man, they got memorials all over the place from World War II. We lost 100,000 people here. We lost 1 million people. We lost 900,000 people here. This is where they slaughtered whole villages. This is where they put people in a church and burned it. If you think for 1 second that a bunch of goose-stepping lunatics with Hitler tattoos all over them are going to remain in power in Kiev, I got an Oreshnik to tell you. I'll tell you that
and
right now.
and
It ain't happening. Hmm?
Belarus as well. That
Yeah.
they don't get any audience in this conversation, but they they broke the back line of the Wehrmacht in World War II, and the Nazis had 2,000 camps in Belarus. They lost 2.5 million people. They've got
25% of the people,
they,
25% of the people in Belarus were killed. They went, I
yeah,
forgot how many hundreds of villages. The Nazis would go to the village, put everybody into the church and burn the church and kill the whole town. They did it
yeah,
to like hundreds of villages.
I
So
know.
there's no way in hell that these people are going to say, "Oh yeah, old Adolf Zaluzhny, sure." Well, no, no. And what I think the West is going to find is they're going to be like, well, you know how they always negotiate with themselves? Let's put together a deal amongst themselves. And then they'll say, we can all live with this. Here, Russia, take it. And Russia's going to say, I think we told you a while back
Yeah.
what we would take. Do not present that to us.
See, they
And
can play that game. They can play that game of doing putting a deal together without the counterparties involved, and then presenting it. And if they reject it, they say, "Oh, it was a perfectly good deal. Russia doesn't want peace." That's what Zelensky's think. Russia
yeah,
doesn't want to come to their table. This works on the Arab countries that are completely divided and totally demoralized, but it's not going to work on Russia. This sort of tactic, but they're trying it. You can see the Trump administration trying a 28-point plan, the latest one. I love it. Why not 50
what?
points? Why not 94 points? I mean, just pick a number. I mean, just make it bigger, Donald. Make it bigger, make it longer, more points. It's not gonna happen. It's not gonna happen because unless it addresses the fundamental issues that more or less are delineated in the letter sent by Russia to Tony Blinken in
Yep.
December of 2021,
Yep.
unless it echoes and mirrors that, then forget it. It's a non-starter. I mean, I didn't go to diplomacy school, but I can work this out. I'm paying attention. It's like I'm wondering what's going on in Washington. Like, who are these people? Did they think that they can reinvent statecraft? Like, they're so brilliant. They got elected. Wow, MAGA got a mandate. And we're just going to throw the rule book for negotiations and diplomacy and treaties and international law. Chuck that out the window. I got Steve here. I got my buddy Witkoff from Atlantic City. I've got my son-in-law Jared here. He's good with the property. I've got a few other. Who else has he got? Tom Barak. I've got Tom Barak. He's also good on the deals. I've got the A team here. I got Marco Rubio here. He's not going to be involved in any major decision making, but he's there next to me. Look at the size of my gang. Look at this. Look at this. I've got a gang. Look at the show of force here. Look at this. This is the Trump administration. How can anybody deny us? Right? We're just so freaking brilliant. I mean, it's a joke at this point. It really is.
And ultimately, here's the problem they have. The Russians' position is going to be, nah, we won't take that deal. You have to take the deal. And here's the Russian position. Well, then we'll just keep fighting. See, ultimately, the Russians are always going to call their bluff. So the Russians' position is going to be, okay, well, then we'll just keep fighting. That's going to be the Russians' position. And they're going to be sitting there needing it out. Ah, crap, the Kiev is falling apart. We don't even know how the hell we're going to get a government back together in there. The people are basically kidnapped victims being thrown into a van and taken to the front. They're not thrilled about it. Right, it's cold as hell. The Russians are turning the light switch off, so that that's the people are not thrilled. They're going to all be refugees flooding into Western Europe because they have no. The real cold hasn't hit yet. So the Russians are going to play their hand, and they're going to offer them some half-ass deal. Yes, we'll just freeze the contact line and this, and the Russians are going to say, "Nah, but that's okay. We'll just keep fighting. No hard feelings. We looked at your deal. It's not acceptable. Hey, we certainly appreciate you guys, giving us a deal and trying to do the best you can. Hey, no hard feelings here. But since it doesn't work out for us, we're just going to keep fighting." And the problem is, and if Trump or whoever bluffs, well, then we'll join the war. The Russians are going to say, okay, I understand that. We don't want that to happen. But if you're going to join the war, you're going to have to join the war because we're not accepting the deal. That's your decision. If you all join the war, we'll nuke the hell out of you. But you're going to have to do that because we're not going to accept the deal. It's like when somebody walks up to you and say, "Hey, Patrick, I'd like to buy your car." And you're like, "Yeah, I want to sell a car for about $10,000. The guy says, "I'll give you $5." No. All right, 100. No. All right, you got me. I'll give you 200. And you're like, I don't care how you put it to me. I gave you a price. That's the price of the car. And there's nothing you can get me to do to lower. That's where they are.
Yeah. And meanwhile, Russia is basically gambling for the future on next generation of drones and electronic warfare, which they're testing and implementing in the field. And they're moving forward on this. They've mobilized a portion of their military industrial complex to be the world leader in this area, and they are, and they will remain as such. And that's also going to put more pressure on what's left of the Ukrainian armed forces. The standard of soldier, the level of soldier that they're putting on the front lines, it's really pathetic. And of course, all of the best men and soldiers, they're going to keep back for the Praetorian Guard and to defend Kiev or whatever. But they've gotten soft in Kiev because they know that Russia's not, it's not a priority and they're not, Russia's not interested in taking, quote, all of Ukraine, as Trump said.
Right.
So what they're doing is, anytime you inject loads of cash into any situation, whether it's domestically or internationally, it breeds corruption. It just does. And so that's what's happening. They're getting soft and corrupt, and now the rats are jumping ship because perhaps there may have been some warnings coming down the U.S. pipeline. We're not going to be entertaining this or that going forward. You guys
You
need
think this is
to.
coming from the U.S.? That's the question.
I don't
Where
know.
do you have? Yeah, and that's what everybody's asking. It's clear that this did not just fall out of the sky, that somebody didn't wake up one day and say, "Oh, what do you know? There's corruption in Kiev.
It
There's
could be
gambling
coming.
going on at the chicken ranch." That didn't happen. That someone said, "All right, let's make this happen." And the question is cui bono. Whoever did it had a reason. And
Yeah.
clearly, whoever did it knew it was going to severely disrupt Kiev and possibly tear the regime to pieces.
You know what it is? It could be, Garland. It could be a combination of both, and I'll tell you why. Because the Democrats installed this system in Kiev. It's a Democrat, it's a Biden
Yes, it
Obama
is.
creation,
Yes, it is.
and so now the Democrats are out of power. They're not able to, and with all of their operatives and proxies, able to micromanage and to basically do damage control, which is a constant thing in Ukraine, constant thing. And I think it's just coming unglued. And at the same time, there are Ukrainians that are absolutely tired of this status
Yes.
quo and who want to preserve what's left of their country. And I see people every day, like YouTubers in Kharkiv and in Odessa and other places. They're putting out videos criticizing the government. So, and they weren't able to do that before. What does that tell you? So you've got that. You've got reports of resistance,
Yeah.
anti-Zelensky resistance fighters, sabotage. You're not going to get a lot of press on this in the West, but it's the reports that I've seen are credible. From former NATO intelligence Jacques Baud has been
Yep.
talking about this for the last month. So, so the con the the convergence of these factors maybe have created this situation where the Trump administration is just not on top of the damage control the way the Democrats were, and there are Ukrainians that are just basically tired of the grift and the graft, and maybe they're not getting their share as well, and it's coming out. And I'm sure there are warring factions within Ukraine because there are haves and have-nots. Let's be honest.
Yes, yes,
There
yes.
are haves and have-nots, and the economy is in the toilet. Their currency's in free fall. There's no future for Ukraine. And meanwhile, you have people driving around in Lamborghinis and Maseratis, and whose kids are going to, 50,000 euro tuition a year, private schools in Spain and other European countries, and so forth. It's not washing with, a lot of the people in Ukraine. So what's left of Ukraine, and the Ukraine will, at this rate, definitely be a rump state. The question is it going to be a rump state with or without the southern Odessa coast? That's the big strategic question, and that's the one that I think that's the death knell for NATO. If Russia takes Odessa, that's the whole point of NATO just dies at that point.
And I
It
think they got
dies.
to. They've got. I think Russia has to take that land bridge to Transnistria, and I think it happens. And I think there's no way to stop it.
That's the end of
Here's
NATO.
Yes,
That's the
sir.
end of
Well,
NATO.
I think NATO's done anyway. First of all, NATO is nothing but like it's a picture of NATO. They got graphics and they got a building or something that's kind of shaped like a friggin' SS. That's weird. But anyway, but NATO, it's got they got lots of meetings and committees and stuff like that. But they got no war machine at all. Okay, and they're fighting amongst each other. They're just a bunch of thieves. It's not. It's they said it's a defensive alliance. That's a lie, but it ain't even an offensive alliance anymore. NATO couldn't beat friggin' Yemen, for God's sake, right? But I think this. Let me throw a theory at you. Again, I'm not saying this is true. I'll throw a theory at you, bounce it off you. You give me some feedback. Here's one theory. Epstein's fallen. It ain't good if you're Trump. Number one. Well, okay, I think they scrubbed that. What's falling from Epstein is still, they're going to take some heat. They know it, but they've scrubbed the hell out of it. Let's be honest about it. They're not releasing all the stuff that says Epstein's a freaking Mossad, a CIA and MI6 agent. We know that, but you'll never find that in there. They're going to scrub that, but they still got to release some stuff that's not going to look good. Okay. Meanwhile, Trump's numbers, do the Zionism and everything else. Candace Owens is making Nick Fuentes, all this, the whole deal. Things ain't looking good for MAGA right now. They're turning on Trump saying, you bastard, you lied to us. Come January 1st here, they're really going to start the midterm cycle is really going to fire up. If you're Trump, you need a win bad. Bad, bad, bad. Your ass is grass right now. And if you get your ass kicked in the midterms and the Democrats come in, they're not going to be successful, but they're going to impeach you just over and over and over. You're just one long 2-year impeachment, which means your presidency is dead. Anything you wanted to do is finished. Anything you thought, hoped, dreamed, gone, right? And everybody in the party is going to blame you, and they're going to say, Trump, you screwed the whole party. You lied. The people turned on you. So his name is mud, right? But if you end the Ukraine war, all of a sudden you say, hey, guys, look at this. I said I was going to end it. Sure, it took me a long time. It was existential. We were going to get you were going to get nuked. Everybody said I couldn't do it. They said, you know what? Nobody can do that. But I'm Trump. Trump can end it. Everybody said only Trump can end the war. And Trump ended the war. And I ended the war. And I saved the world. And it's the greatest ever end of any war that has ever happened. The guy who just recently had an MRI or something like that. Or one of these, and they're like, "What do you think?" That doctor said it was the greatest MRI he's ever seen. He's a madman.
But
you get my point.
But Garland, if Trump does that, it's not really worth anything. What Trump would do is do that in October of 2026, even though the war won't be ended, but he'll declare a victory before the midterms, and that'll be enough for Trump. That's about as deep as he can get on this. I don't think it can be done. Not only that, the Europe, if it's purely on political motivation, the Europeans, that's a weak spot for Trump. The Europeans can and the British can sabotage that very easily, very easily. So they, unless he's willing to basically rewrite the narrative on Ukraine, which he's not, rewrite it back to the truth. In other words, the root
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
causes that the root causes that Lavrov and the Russians are banging on about. You must acknowledge the root causes of this conflict. I don't think he's capable of that. He's not willing to do that. Neither is anybody in his administration. So it ain't going to happen. So I think you can get the theatrics that you talked about there for the midterms, but the ideal time for Trump would be to sort of play that pantomime in October and claim victory, even though the war would probably still be going. That is just so typical Trump, is to declare an end to a war that's ongoing.
Well, like you
So
did in Gaza. Well, but the
yeah,
other part of it is there's a no. Well, it depends on how you look at the midterms, because one of the issues that there's of great concern here amongst both parties is because of Gaza and because of all of that. What happens when some person who turned on Marjorie Taylor Greene and turned on Candace Owens and called them a bunch of scumbags, and some young guy who's about 35 years old runs against them in the primaries and says, "Vote for me. I really am MAGA, and I'm with Marjorie Taylor Greene." They'll lose. So the first thing before they even get to the midterms is you got the other party, but you got all the dinosaurs in the Republican Party and the Democratic Party horrified that they're going to lose over Gaza, and some of them will. So this could also be like, I'm just throwing stuff out there. We're brainstorming here, but I would be horrified if I was Trump that, if I was the system, that I could really lose a lot of God. And now what happens when you have people that really will vote against Israel and really will vote against Gaza in power? So there's that in too. There's that maybe I need to get out from under Ukraine so I can focus on Gaza and other things. And I need a win because I got to have something. Otherwise, the people that I support will lose.
I think he's lost the window to get out of Ukraine and do it in a decisive way. I think he had an opportunity to do that a couple of times in the last 9 or 10 months, and he's blown it. So I think that's gone. That opportunity is finished. It's just it's a huge liability. The reputation of NATO, of these governments, of Washington, everybody, it's just tied up in this. So
Yeah.
what I think is more likely in this one is that the pivot to South America, that there's political capital there in the way that Margaret Thatcher used the Falklands War to shore up her political polling and her government's legitimacy by a very ham-fisted, dirty, and messy quote win that was really a loss. If you think about it in military terms, the British Navy got their butts kicked by the Argentinians and the Exocet missiles. So in that sense, but it signaled the end of Britain's ability to project any kind of military power and confined to a European region. By the same token, a ham-fisted, messy Trump would be looking for a win against Venezuela, okay? But it would also, the backlash in Latin America. I mean, you're talking about Brazil and all these countries turn
Colombia,
against. I mean, it's all these former allies that U.S. has just worked so hard to try to get them on side over the decades. They'd lose them all. So, and they would also reinvigorate the left-wing appeal for left-wing governments throughout South America. They in Milei and all of this other stuff. I mean, it's not going to go down well. So, no. but he might go for it in the way that Thatcher did. So it'll be a poison chalice, if you will, as a sort of a W. But it's also going to really just destroy America's legitimacy and reputation, even in its own hemisphere, where it's been able to wield great influence. So the global South, I think, would react very strongly to an undeclared war of aggression against Venezuela or Colombia, for that matter, over this fake idea that there's the narco terrorism coming out of Venezuela. It's just completely stupid. It's one of the dumbest things I've ever seen, but we've seen some crazy, dumb things in the past. I think this even tops the Bush administration, because the Bush administration at least went through the effort to fake it, with all of this sort of fake intelligence and the Winnebagos of death. And, they put in a good effort, at least the entertainment value was there at the UN and everything else. And they had all these neocons trotting out, and you had Curveball and all these Iraqis and Chalabi, and it was great. The Trump administration doesn't feel they need to go through that level of vaudevillian fake intelligence performances. They can just say it's a narco state and that it's a threat to U.S. national security. Ergo, we must attack it and take the oil. Okay, so it's worse than Bush. This is going to be the worst, the most neocon administration in history. This administration. Yeah, I think it already is, personally.
Yeah, here's another part of that, though. Okay. They can stand back from Venezuela and throw some long-range weapons in, right?
Cruise missiles, tomahawks.
Yeah, here's the problem. Here's a reality. If you're Rome, you got a big, huge land army, and you can go overwhelm the land army of whatever this city-state you're and take this stuff, because you got to ultimately you're going to have people on the ground. The United States got 16,000 soldiers in the air, 16, 17,000 soldiers. Dude, this country's the size of France and Germany combined. Oh, did I mention they got nothing but jungles? I'll put it like this. Venezuela, been there. They got mountains, they got jungles, and they got mountains covered with jungles. And they got more poisonous kinds. I got all these kinds. They got their own rattlesnake. They got coral snakes. They got this kind of viper, that kind of viper. When I was there, people were going to go hiking on a trail, and they were like telling us all the kind of snakes you got to watch out with, because you'll step on them and you'll be dead. They got that bushwhacker or whatever it is, the furry lance. I mean, you get bit by those things, you're done, right? You're going to send a bunch of soldiers crawling through this crap, 16,000 soldiers. I've been there. They aren't the whole population. Literally, they got millions of people. Here's a gun. Let's fight for the revolution. And they're ready to fight.
They're mobilized. Yeah, they're already mobilized.
I've been there. You go into Venezuela, they're going to cut you to pieces. People forget what happened with the Bay of Piglets. A bunch of mercenaries, their plan was, I forgot, 120 of them, whatever. They're going to get in boats. They're going to sneak ashore. They're going to make their way somehow to the presidential palace, where they're going to take out Maduro. One of the stupidest things I ever heard. They didn't even get to shore. You know why? Because the fishermen are members of the militia, and they were armed to the teeth. They couldn't get past the fishermen.
They apprehended them. Yeah.
And they shot a bunch of them. Why? Because they got AK-47s in their boats. Because everybody is armed. So you're going to go in every village you go by, every town, every hill, every mountain. They're going to be lighting you up. There's 16,000 soldiers in Venezuela is mincemeat. So even if you throw some long-range weapons at this thing, and it's a huge country, how much damage can you do? Yeah, you can hit a city here and there. The giant country's gigantic. So again, one other thing. And how many people are going to show up at our border as refugees? Well, I'm here to stop immigration. Started a war. Oh my God, we got 1 million people at the border. All these people in these other countries will now say, you know what? I'm fleeing a conflict, and under international law, they have a legal claim to refugee status, because legally now they are fleeing a conflict. So all these people that want to go in Guatemala and El Salvador are going to say, now we got what we want. Everybody head for the border. You start that, your border's got 1 million people on it, and your soldiers can't have, what does Venezuela have? 100,000, a couple 100,000 troops. But they got millions of people fighting. You got 16,000 soldiers. It is a debacle of all debacles waiting to happen.
Well, what will happen is, if the U.S. does engage Venezuela militarily, it will be a state of war. And in Venezuela, they have this opposition that's allowed to gallivant around, led by Maria Machado, whatever her name is, the Nobel Peace Prize winner. They're allowed to sort of be out and about doing their opposition stuff, funded by USAID and Open Society and whatnot. But that's all finished when the war begins. Then a state of emergency, and none of that's going to be tolerated. So those people are going to be, and our they're going to flee to America,
They're
and
going to
we're going
leave.
to
Yeah.
promise them safe passage, and they're going to get automatically in. Just like with Syria, if you showed up in Lesbos at the gate to Europe and you said, "Down with Bashar," immediate asylum, like boom, straight in. So everyone knew this. They knew what political orientation they had to have to get to fast track the refugee and asylum status, because
Yep.
it's political. And that
Yep.
will happen is, here's the problem, Garland, in Washington, is the Democrats, hey, they brought in hundreds of thousands of Venezuelans under the same pretext that they're
Yep.
anti-Maduro.
Yep.
And it was a twofold benefit. One was to get Democratic voters in. The other was to build a fifth column of Venezuelans that would be against the socialist government. And then what happened is, the problem was the right wing viewed that as mass migration,
Yep.
and are sort of wanting to send them back, and then they're bringing out the gang narrative within that, and all the trend de la agua and all this other stuff. And so, but ultimately the liberals, they're pro regime change in Venezuela. They forget about the socialist government providing housing for the poor and all this stuff. They're totally against. They want regime change. This is the new neoliberal Democrat Party. So the neocons and the liberals are on the same page.
Yes, they are.
That's
Yep.
the problem. They're total hypocrites. The limousine liberals, these Democrats, complete hypocrites. They're actually quietly backing Trump on
Oh,
this.
yes. Absolutely.
And that just shows you the total moral corruption. This is just so emblematic of how bad and how corrupt, how immoral, and what hypocrites these people are in Washington. It's just this is just the perfect case study, I think. But that's why this is happening, Garland. There's no pushback on this from the New York Times or the Post, or in these Democrat rags. They're not pushing back at all. This is like so easy to topple Trump if you wanted to, just on this Venezuelan aggression.
New York
So
Times.
easy.
New York Times. The
There we
case
are.
for overthrowing Maduro.
Brett
The
Stevens.
liberal. Look at this.
So
The case
they're
for
on
overthrowing.
they're on Trump's side, Garland.
Yeah.
So these people, they got nothing left. There's no card to play anymore. These people have jettisoned every last drop of moral and political, ethical legitimacy, international law, U.S. law. Forget about Congress declaring, and they're backing Trump's conspiracy theory that Maduro is a narco kingpin, the former bus driver Nicolas Maduro.
There we go. I've been outspoken in calling on the administration to act against Nicolas Maduro's dictatorship. So now they're just like, okay, well, we hate Trump. He's the worst thing ever. Oh, you know what? Now that we thought of it, perhaps in hindsight, Trump's a pretty good guy after all. Now that he's going to do a regime change somewhere that we want. So they're being exposed.
I rest my case, Garland. I rest my case. This is just so perfect.
But but here's the other part. Man, he sticks his foot in that mess, and we send a bunch of troops in there, and they get killed, and they fire a couple missiles and hit a couple ships, and a bunch of, what those same liberals will say? They'll turn on Trump. They'll be like, yeah, Trump, go for it. And then if it goes real bad, oh, we got to impeach Trump. He's done something stupid.
Maybe not, Garland. I think they'll rev up the patriotism. The Fox and the CNN machine.
We've got to make it a full war.
Now, whose side are you on? Are you standing with our troops? Are you going to stand with our troops? Or are you standing with the communists? That's the default position, because that's where the media is going on this. So wherever the media goes, that's where the political class will go as well, and it will be America or the communists, the narco.
Yeah, the other part of it is this:
narco.
One other part. You know what that is? Trump losing MAGA. MAGA, a lot of the people who are the MAGA people are like, they're literally saying, we didn't vote for this crap. We said we didn't want any more foreign wars. They're saying, look, we're sick of this Israel crap. Man, I'm over here. I'm telling you, a lot of the MAGA people are like down with me. You know what I mean? They're like listening to Jimmy Dore and Glenn Greenwald and stuff like that. And they're like, oh, screw this. We don't want this. The other part is, if he starts another war, MAGA's going to go ape shit, and he could be done. You know what I mean? I mean, that's the other part that Trump has to take into account. Not that he will, or I don't know that he even gives a crap, but that will significant, especially going into the midterms.
It's going to be low
Devastating.
turnout. It's low turnout at the polls for Republicans, and the Democrats will retake control of the House. They'll get the numbers because most people, disenchanted Trump supporters, are just going to back off because they're not going to vote Democrat. And there's going to be probably very little options, or they'll just be so disenchanted with politics. So Democrats will and then there'll be an impeachment of Trump, and they have legitimate grounds for impeachment if they just have to take their pick, whether it's tariffs or whether it's any of these other sort of wars. I mean, now there's legitimate impeachment cases that you just pick one off the shelf. There's at least 5 or 6.
Well, the problem is all the things that you really could impeach him for, they'll support him for all of those. They'll like try to impeach him for taking a plane from Qatar or something, like, you know, of the flying castle. They'll try to impeach him for one of these inane.
What about a violation of posse comitatus, deploying U.S. troops all over?
That's the kind of stuff.
That would be a huge overreach, executive overreach, and there's plenty of but leave it to the Dems to pick the fake one. They'll screw it up. Yeah, I agree. Yeah,
and the problem, and America will be interesting simply because, like, the Dems are done in a way. They're, you know, they over Gaza, they're totally abandoned, and Trump is like, the Republicans are just like running their people, and we're getting to a point where like the Republicans will lose because the Democrats got 10 votes and they got 8. But basically, like 99.9% of Americans are going to be like, screw these Democrats. The Republicans hate their guts. They're all a bunch of genocidal lunatics. And it's getting to the point where, and I think that is something that the ruling elite and the political class will be scared of, and that is there's no legitimacy to the government. You know, they want people to show up and vote so that they can say X amount of million people vote, we have a legitimate government. When it gets to the point where nobody's showing up, there's no real legitimacy to the government. And we're like approaching that because these two parties are friggin', they're finished.
Yeah, that would be a good protest if no one showed up to the elections, because it isn't really going to matter at all anyway. But yeah, if voter turnout was just historically low, I think that would send a real signal to the establishment. But then again, these people are so corrupt. They'll just
they don't care.
Yeah, they'll say, "Oh, Trump will say, even if voter turnout was down by like 50% and he won by 0.5%, it's a historic landslide. We did tremendous job, tremendous ground game. Reince Priebus, we brought him in to do the job. You know, it'd
beautiful.
Be something like this.
Yeah, it was beautiful. Nobody's ever seen it.
Yeah, my daughter-in-law, you know, whatever, you know.
Nobody's ever seen a victory like this before. I was talking to the pollsters. They said never, that they've never seen anything like this before. When the guy literally got like what was he got recently, an MRI or something? And he said, the doctor told me he's never seen the results of an MRI like that before. And I'm like, you're a sick man, Donald Trump. You're really
quite
sick
frankly,
man.
he's seen a lot of MRIs in his head, but nothing like that. I can tell you that. It was a perfect MRI. Perfect. And I had a good phone call afterwards with the doctor. Great phone call. And a great phone call.
He's a sick man. We're dealing with a very sick man here. You know the bad thing about it? Before we go, I got to say one thing. I feel uncomfortable with these words coming out of my mouth. Sometimes you say something and you feel like you just want to throw up. This is bad. So prepare for this. Kamala Harris would have been worse.
Yeah.
We've been nuked by now. We'd all been nuked by now.
Probably, but maybe the pitchforks would have been out and they would have just basically breached the gates of the White House, and that would have been glorious.
Yeah, exactly.
So I don't know, Garland. It's just, I dread to think of that scenario, as tempting as it is to try to game that one out. I don't know about that. So
well, let's just go here. When you got Trump and Kamala Harris running, when Trump looks really legitimate, like the better option, the whole game has collapsed.
Yeah. Well, you know, the point is this: it's that Trump was the change candidate.
Yeah.
And we, those of us who supported that, wanted change, and they wanted those things which were promised on the campaign, and they have not been delivered. So
That,
therefore, it's over. It's
that's a
time.
good point. That's a good point. And that
You got
was,
to, yeah.
yeah,
As flawed as Trump is, and with all of his baggage and everything else, he put some very, very strong promises that
yeah,
were fundamentally different from everybody else, and people supported him on that basis.
yeah.
He has come up short. That's an understatement. So he must go.
I didn't
As
think
far as
about
the
that.
base is concerned, he's no longer trustworthy. He is absolutely stamped over the U.S. Constitution in a way that I've never seen a president do. And for a Republican and someone who claims to be, there's nothing conservative about Trump. There really isn't. He's not conservative. He's just an out of control sort of neoliberal stroke neocon now.
Yeah,
And
yeah, really.
that's all he is. People need to. It's so funny that the last thing I'll say, Garland, I don't want to bang on about the Epstein thing, but he's rebranded the Epstein thing as a Democrat hoax. It's a Democrat hoax. And in the Democrats and Donald Trump was a Democrat. He was bankrolling the DNC before 2015. Hello. So that time period he's referring to, that some of Epstein was, the Democrats were, running money through Epstein or whatever. Donald Trump was Epstein's buddy during that time, and he was also bankrolling the Democratic Party. He's bankrolling Hillary Clinton, for God's sakes. So, I mean,
Okay.
what's he talking about? When did he wake up and become a conservative? In 2015. He rebranded himself as a conservative. So, from that point of view, I mean, I've just given up with Trump. He's a
Yeah.
complete political fraud. MAGA is a fraudulent construct. It was never real. At this point, it's a cheap red hat made in China, or as Trump would
And
say,
and and
China,
and
China.
here's the thing. I'll say this. In my opinion, if Trump could get out of Ukraine, would he do it? I think he would. I think if he could get out of you, why
It's
or what?
it's not a
No, but
question of getting out,
but
Garland. It's
yeah.
it's a question. Does he have the capability to understand what's going on
Well,
first?
that's the point. Yeah, that's what I
And
was going to get
and
to.
what he to it's not just about getting out. It's about understanding the United States' role in the world, in Europe, with its relations with Russia, because there's no getting out. You still have to re-up all of these arms treaties and agreements, and with Russia, the relationship continues. Ukraine's an important part of that discussion. So the U.S. is going to be involved. It can't just withdraw from the world,
Yeah,
because
exactly.
when the U.S. withdraws from the world, you get World War I and World War II
Right.
and World War III. But that's providing this a sane U.S. leadership and a sane U.S. administration that has actual bravery and leadership skills, that's not afraid to hold the military-industrial complex and the central bankers at bay for the good of the planet. Does Donald Trump have those qualities? I am not convinced he does. I have not
Well,
seen
oh
them.
well, I'll put it like this. I would say if you ask Donald Trump, "Do you want out of Ukraine?" the answer would be yes. I want to fly a 747, but I don't know how to do it. It's too complex, right? So
Yeah, exactly.
between his lack of political sophistication or the I'll say geopolitical sophistication, right? He wants out. I think he does, but geopolitical sophistication, you got to understand, as you said, it's much more than just getting out. Oh, okay, I'll just close the door and go home. Number one. And number two, I believe that he put together, just like Obama, his entire cabinet was named by whatever, JP Morgan or Citibank, one of them, right? That when not Trump, not Obama, when a president comes in, he does not pick his cabinet. His donors pick
Correct.
his cabinet, right?
Correct.
And so Trump came in, his donors picked his cabinet, and his donors made sure that he had a cabinet that would not allow him to reverse course on any issue that they didn't want him to reverse course on. So, notwithstanding what he wants on any policy, the fact that the president doesn't pick his cabinet and his donors made sure that anything that he wanted that they would have the people in that cabinet to thwart it. It don't matter what he wants. The donors put together a cabinet, and the table is already set. If he wanted X, and the donors don't want it, they've set the table to ensure that it doesn't happen.
But more specifically, Garland, the donors we're talking about here are Israeli linked donors,
Yeah.
because the transition
Yes.
team was Howard Lutnick
Yep.
from Cantor Fitzgerald and Jared Kushner. They managed the transition train. And we now know that Mary Mandelson and the lobby, the major donors, Israeli donors, they handpicked all of the cabinet positions that are related to national security and foreign policy, every single one. So the cabinet, Trump's government, was selected with Israel in mind.
Yes, it
That
was.
the Ukraine is a side hustle
Yes,
for
it
these
is.
people. They don't care. They don't care. In fact, Israel's actually quite happy that this gets unresolved and escalates, because it will ultimately weaken the U.S., and that's good for Israel. Israel doesn't care about America. Israel doesn't care about the Republican Party. They'll just shift over to the Democrats in 3 years.
Hey, how
They
about
don't
this?
care. They don't care.
A
They
whole
don't
bunch of
care.
these.
Oh, they just care about themselves and that they're getting what they want. That's all they care about. And the problem is, all of the Russian specialists, the State Department, all these they've purged all of these people that would normally be helping to put together these deals and these negotiations. They're gone. They're
Yep.
gone between Elon, Doge, and the purge under Biden. They're gone. So there's no.
And
So
did you
now you're left with a bunch of grifters, social media posers, and real estate half baked real estate developers from the tri-state area. That's the freaking government, Garland.
did you
That's
see
it's
where
pathetic. It's really pathetic.
one of these members of the Kiev government got caught like stealing 100 million, which he probably stole 100 times that, 100 million? He fled to Israel.
Yeah, yes,
So
that's right.
not only do the
Tamir,
Zionists want to keep this going, they're stealing money. That 300 billion that have gone to Ukraine, it hits Ukraine and it hits the skids and speeds up and makes a U-turn right on into Israel. The Zionist billionaires are stealing the money that's going. That's just another way to reroute money to Zionists. So they don't want it to end, because they're like, yeah, get another 100 billion there. What are you going to do? We're going to steal. And if somebody gets caught, what are you going to do? We caught that guy stealing 100 million. He's going to escape to Israel. And do you think the U.S. government's going to call Israel? Hey, you got to send it.
no,
They're not going to say a word, because they
safe
already
haven
know
for
that's where the money's going anyway.
that's where it ends up. The safe haven for, and they get washed into diamonds from South Africa or Antwerp, or you end up in Brooklyn or Yonkers or whatever, But the Israel is the organized criminals safe haven, basically. And Kolomoisky is Israeli. He bankrolled Tamir Mindich and the whole Zelensky media empire. He's in jail right now, probably, I think, to protect him, because probably the safest place for him is in detention. But he could, he was in Israel before, and he was the top dog in Ukraine, funding all this stuff. So it's
How
an
about this?
organized crime
How about
syndicate.
this?
It tracks back
Yeah.
to Israel.
How about this? You got a country with a bunch of goose-stepping Nazis marching around. Everybody's like, there's a bunch of Nazis. And who's running the government? A bunch of Zionists. I mean, that's the giveaway. Oh, it's a Nazi. Yeah, well, kind of. Yeah, okay, whatever. But
Yeah,
there's a bunch of Zionists stealing every
Kolomoisky,
dime.
Kolomoisky, who's an Israeli Jew and a
Yeah,
Zionist, and he was running these call centers,
yeah.
and these for the Banderites. He was paying for these very Azov battalion creations, and raising their profile, and equipping them and organizing them. He paid for it. So
You know what
there
they
is
are?
no,
They're
they
cannon
don't.
fodder. They're
It
cannon
does,
fodder for the Zionists.
they don't
You
care
create.
about World War II history. It doesn't factor in at all. It's
They're cannon
literally power.
fodder.
The U.S. will use ISIS terrorists. They'll use Nazis. They'll take the worst people on this planet. The United States government, sure as hell, will always partner with them, because they know they'll get the job done in the most brutal and vicious way. And whatever, name
And
me a
then they'll get
despotic.
slaughtered, and that's
Yeah.
their job. Right now, as the Russians wipe out the Azovs and slaughter them off, and all of these Nazis, the leaders in Kiev are just laughing, like,
No,
that's
and
their
then and the
job.
British
That's
and
what
the
they're there
British and
for.
the U.S. will exfiltrate anybody who's surviving. They'll move them to Germany, and they'll keep them going and train them, and they'll redeploy them in the future to destabilize Russian-held areas or whatever, exactly like they did after the Second World War. Bandera went to West Germany and was basically working for MI6, at that point, and then they're organizing all the Nazis stay behind units in Western Ukraine and Poland and other parts of Eastern Europe, and they kept this project going right until present day. So it never stopped. It never stopped.
No.
And they'll do the same thing here.
Yeah, Patrick Henningsen, tell everybody where they can find you and all your stuff and what you're up to.
21stcenturywire.com. That's our main mothership. Daily reports, daily intel briefs, great analysis. We have the Sunday Wire live, the midweek Wire live as well, and also I've started a Substack page which we're working on populating. But there's some nice pieces there if you want to know a little bit about me. You go to Patrick Henningsen at Substack.com, and we'll be adding some content there as well.
All right, thanks a lot, everybody. 21st Century Wire is where you can find everything, all things Patrick Henningsen, and he's great. And we certainly appreciate you coming on there. All right, guys. You see everything going across the bottom. I want to thank all my Patreon people and everybody who donates over at PayPal, buy me a coffee, all that kind of stuff. Appreciate it if you can support the channel. I got my P.O. box. You can send me letters. People send me books, whatever you want, or a donation. It doesn't matter. My P.O. box there. The most important thing you can do is share this on all your social media platforms. We're out.